And so welcome to the AMP Bootcamp series. This is a session that we're focused on how do I find funding for my mentorship program. And what we're going to do today is keep this in a bit of a what we're calling a community call format. So, you know, Doug Piquette from ERIEC and Bruce Randall from CRIEC. And also I'm going to name Najib Mangal from Lethbridge Family Services, who also has had some success recently in terms of finding funding for their mentorship program. There's a lot of expertise in the space here, and including the experience that you're bringing to the session. So we're going to have a loose structure, but feel free to ask questions or things that are specific to your organization. I know Doug and Bruce have a ton of information to share, and so we'll jump into the question of sort of how to find funding. I do want to just mention that we're so appreciative of the funding support from the government Alberta to support the Alberta Mentorship Program initiative, which has been focused on supporting organizations to get over the threshold to start their own mentorship program. And so funding, we know, is a crucial part of that picture. And so I was wondering, we're pretty informal here. So Bruce or Doug, whoever wants to start off, the first question we're looking at is like, where is there funding? Where are the bucks? Where do we find that in terms of funding organizations?
I'll let Doug start.
Go ahead.
So Doug, you've been in the biz a year longer than me, so I'll have to defer to my elder on this one.
Wow, thank you, I think. Yeah, I think there's a question that occurs before even this question, which is, I think our success, I would say, has always been built upon good planning. And so, and a part of that planning was required us to do a little bit of research and investigation in terms of, because we had no idea. I think some of you who've been familiar with our history, we had no experience in doing mentorship prior to ERIEC, and I'm sure it was the same for Bruce. And so doing our homework was really important before you start looking for funding, of course. And so part of that planning included, doing some litmus tests and what we did here in Edmonton was we did focus groups with immigrants, with serving agencies, and with employers. So we wanted to be sure we were hitting the mark. We wanted to show that there was support for it. So if you're going to be preparing a proposal, if you can, show some documentation. If it's your own work, perfect. If you do some focus groups, it does take some time. But if you have some research that's done, that's going to bode well when you start making your applications. And I'm just going to give you an example with the Alberta Mentorship Program, which is what this platform is about. Even with that, and I would say, like, my board members who are all from the business sector, they said to us, make sure you collect anything that says, that it comments on the success of the program. And in terms of applying for additional funding. So these are engineers and people who work for the IT sector, and from the nonprofit sector. It's not something typically I would do, but it was a really good suggestion. And so we've been accumulating some of that the good feedback that we're able to use as a support for basically funding. So that's where it starts, I think. Where does funding exist? Well, it can exist from everywhere, from some of your existing funders of your programs. There may be some interest in terms of things that are innovative and, thank God that mentorship is still considered innovative and a little bit out there. So that's something a bit nuanced, and funders will look for those kinds of things if they haven't been involved with it before. So existing funders, new funders could be anywhere from the public sector to the private sector. So everybody's included. And we've spent the last 3 years, well, actually, we've always had sort of diversified funding, provincial and federal, and some private. But the situation in Alberta has been a bit difficult and challenging. At times, we lost a third of our funding from the province. And so that's not to say that that funding's gone forever, but you will have these kinds of shifts where there's interest, where immigrants and employment are maybe a popular kind of notion for governments to be involved with, and sometimes not. Thankfully, when we first started, this kind of initiative was really of interest to both the federal and provincial government, and they were really working almost in lockstep with each other, which is why we had provincial and federal funding at the time back in 2008 to, except to a couple of years ago. So that's where I would say, certainly look at what you have. If you have, some information already, like I say, the focus groups is a one good place to do. If in the case of Najib, they've got some, or even Ulutuyan, like you've done some work already in this sort of theme. Start accumulating that data, and because that data is really powerful when applying for funds, because a lot of these funds too, I mean, as much as they might be interested in something innovative, they want to see that it's actually kind of proven. What are your results? And Bruce can talk a little bit about some of the results that we get for the federal government. Just to give you a sense, I mean, they're looking for the total amount of matches. They're looking for the kind of behavioral change that's occurred as a result of that interaction between mentor and mentee. And then, of course, real hard stuff like employment. So, I mean, yeah, mentorship is nice. It's a beautiful thing. But if it's not moving the needle on that outcome, and I'll be the first one to tell you, like last year, we had an 83% success rate of people who attended our mentorship program. It was 140 mentored matches. 83% of them found work in their field, or had gone back to school in their field. So those are great statistics, and you can use that to leverage for funds. So, but this year we had 56%. So that's under the 65% that's required by IRCC. And that's fine because obviously it's a pandemic year, and there's some understanding and some easement there. But just so that you know, like we're pretty transparent about all of our data. We're really proud of our data, but we're also realistic about what's going on. If there's a recession going on, if there's a pandemic going on, these are going to impact your results. So sorry, that's a long-winded answer, Cheryl. And sorry, Bruce, but
can I throw a question out? Sorry, Bruce, before, and you can piggyback on this because I know you can. So if you haven't done a mentorship program, how do you use the data you have for the audience you have to show like this, to show that you know what you're doing, even though you haven't done the mentorship program?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, if you have a history, like Karen, I don't know if On Placement has been doing mentorship at all, or Dawn, I'm not sure if you guys have been doing that kind of work. If this is something new, it's a new foray into this area, I'm sure that you, in your respective organizations, you've had some great successes in other endeavors. So I would piggyback or build on those kinds of things, even because we didn't have any experience. We went to the feds and to the province and said, this is what we want to do. Here are the systemic barriers that people are facing. We feel because of our focus group sessions, because of these other things that we did, we feel that this kind of mitigative response is going to produce some results. And so we didn't have anything to base it on other than, for example, Bruce and I are affiliated with a group across Canada, Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, that has had years of success, and volumes of mentorship matches. So we use that as a reference. So I couldn't really take credit for it, but we were saying, basically, it's working in other jurisdictions. So let's give it a try. And thankfully, in our case, it was a long period of proving ourselves, because it was our results were small in those early days, and we were figuring things out in terms of the mechanisms, how we were going to, basically implement this kind of strategy. So it took some time. We had the trust and faith of the funders that were behind us at that time, thankfully, because if they had given us a 1 or 2 year period, we would have been hooped. We would have not been able to produce the results, I think, that would be in measure with the amount of money that they were giving us. So does that answer your question, Cheryl?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, Bruce, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, just want to piggyback on what Doug said. I think it starts with two things. It starts with knowing who you are as an organization and what you're looking to achieve. And unless you've done some real good navel gazing or soul searching, and if you're not really sure what you're doing and you think you're going to add mentoring as another bucket, don't. Stop, put your tools down, give it a second thought, connect with people who are in the mentoring game, and really understand why you want to get into mentoring. But if you do want to get into mentoring, as Doug said, and if it's part of your inner DNA, and by that I mean it's part of the vision, mission, and operating guidelines or principles by which you want to go forward, at least mentoring is then part of your overall conversation. So don't look at it transactionally. Don't look at it like, I can get 20 matches and that's probably worth $3,000 each, so I'm going to go apply for 60 grand. If I was a funder, I wouldn't give you 1 penny because you don't believe in what you're doing. But if you come to us like Doug and I did, and we had a couple of things. So as Doug said, we had the track record of mentoring per se, and we want you to piggyback on that track record. So that track record says X, Y, and Z. You can get the research, we can share it. Generally speaking, over time, over the last 20 years, mentoring programs, employment related, connected to newcomer professionals, yielded this kind of a result. Secondly, as Doug said, know what your community wants. What we have found out is that mentoring must be community informed and must be community owned. And if it's not, you don't have a mentoring program. You're not the savior in a community. And if we ever think we are, then both funders and the community are going to tell us, we don't really need you, Bruce, here in the community. So instead, what Doug and I did was, you do the hardcore environmental scans and then the softer stuff, focus groups, but it's an awful lot of coffee, it's an awful lot of tea. It's trying to figure out who in the community you really need to talk to. And if you've done a lot of that work, then that's great. So you've got the hardcore research in the background that you can get from us. You've got the community conversation, which you have to be a part of. You can facilitate it. So don't assume that a mentoring program is what this community needs if you never talk to anybody in the community. Because you might run for 1 or 2 years, but the thing will ultimately fail because you haven't built a foundation. So make sure that the community understands what you're looking to do. And by the community, it's how you want to define it. And if you're in a smaller area, then that's great. You know who has their hands on the levers of so-called power in the community. And I don't mean the political power, but those who make things move. Is it the library? Is it a local service club? Is it one of the houses of faith? Is it other sorts of service groups? You know, is it the Chamber of Commerce, for example? Really figure out who in the community you need to talk to. If you're already past that stage where you realize, okay, mentoring, we know works, our community or our clients really seem to want mentoring. And if you've never gone into looking for funding, then as Doug says, you've got two choices. If it connects to something that you're already doing, you've got some funders there who already believe in what you're trying to do. So that's how mentoring fits together. It's not a separate bucket. Mentoring is a the only piece that we're looking at. Ultimately, we want to change, you know, we want to move the needle on employers' perspective. If you think you can connect it to something that you're already doing, fabulous. That then gives you.
Oh, so Bruce, you're breaking up and freezing quite a bit. So maybe we'll just see if your connection frees up.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been having trouble in that back office there. How is this? Is this a bit better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, great.
So we get a little
Awesome.
clear of his space as we go.
Good, good. So I won't belabor the point anymore, but
yeah, no, and I think
okay, so how's that?
No, that's better. Thanks, Bruce. And I think it's
Okay, good.
an important question. I mean, it seems obvious, but you know, in setting up a funding proposal to describe what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, I wondered if we could focus a little bit on, so how do we talk about what mentorship does, like what the benefits are, the impacts? I think there's a lot of focus on, especially if it's like career mentorship for newcomers, on the benefits for newcomers. But as you said so well, Bruce, like if it's not community owned, you know, it's not going to be successful. So to also talk about the benefits to the community in what it does, and that's one of those simple and difficult questions sometimes. Like, well, it's obvious, you know, people connect together and they share information, and so what? Like, so why is that worth funding? Could you speak at all to your perspectives on that?
Yeah. Doug, do you want to take this one first, or do you want me to go first on this one? Okay. So a great, you know, it's a great question. We about 2 years in, as an example, Cheryl, we thought we knew what we were doing. We thought we knew what we were doing, and so we did a focus group with some mentors, and we asked, why do you mentor? And we got the exact opposite answer than we had anticipated, meaning we had been working on an assumption for 2 years, and we didn't stop and ask mentors, so why do you mentor? The obvious first reason, because I want to give back to the community. But the second reason we fully anticipated had more to do with recognition of some sort. And we realized after 2 years that mentors really, recognition is further down the food chain for them. What they wanted to do was they wanted to network with other mentors. They wanted to gain knowledge and appreciation of other cultures. They wanted to use this as professional development opportunities. And so those became the selling features. And of course, in retrospect, that's exactly who mentors are. They're usually outgoing, volunteer types who don't really need a pat on the back. What they really need is they need some of these other tools, how to be a better mentor, for example. So what that did was it allowed us to understand why people mentor better, thereby allowing us to ensure that we were able to meet their particular needs. On the employer side, from the very beginning, we took the approach that I'm not selling you a program here. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help you resolve some of your own workplace issues. And if your workplace issues, let's say, are recruitment or onboarding or diversity, equity, and inclusion, then we think that mentoring can probably be part of your package of solutions. And so we would walk into an employer and we'd ask them, what's the big rock on your road? And is there something that we have that might help you move that big rock? And so what it is just a ton of talking. It's coffee, tea, whatever it is. But you're understanding what people need. So what we learned was you never make an assumption about anybody or about anything. And then on the larger community groups, we wanted to make sure we had a program that sort of rang true with everybody. And so over the last 8 or 9 years, we've been ensuring that we've met with our group of, let's say, community partners, which is basically everybody else in the community on a regular basis, to talk about what we do, the power of mentoring, and now our community conversations, which are 5 or 6 times a year, based on certain themes, really try to find things that resonate with everybody. And that may give somebody an opportunity to say, oh, I've got a client who is considering mentoring. Maybe I'll connect them over to CRIEC. So it's a lot of not making assumptions. It's a lot of really trying to understand who's out there, what's out there, and it's to be patient, but to be persistent.
Yeah, I would agree with Bruce, and maybe Cheryl, just I got a little bit lost. I just got back from vacation. So what was the question again, just so that I want to make sure?
Well, I think there's like often when we go, like as someone who's written proposals, maybe for more than 20 years, you sit down, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Those details are important. But, where I find the money shot in proposal writing for funding is the so what, like, why does it matter? Like, what's the benefits? And I think often the immediate view is the benefit to the mentee, but like how to write about what mentorship does and how it benefits everyone.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think we're just going back on what Bruce has said. I mean, I think speaking, the lexicon of business is really important in our case. So, I mean, like if you're running a mentorship program, but let's say you're working with youth or you're working with women or Aboriginals, we had maybe a different kind of stakeholder engagement you might look at and how you map that out. In our case, it was like Bruce said, it was a number of coffees and teas with the business community, with the agencies. And we've got 6 staff in total. So, I mean, the only way we can do this work is by leveraging those connections and the supports and the stakeholder engagement that we did. And I think that's an ongoing, as Bruce said, you got to keep doing that year after year just to make sure that people are aware of what you're doing. And, it doesn't matter how simplistic, if you got to run a mentorship program, well, you have to have that dialogue. What does that actually mean? It's just for a lot of people, it's like, oh, that's really nice. But what does that mean from a business point of view? When we talk about the business optic for them or the business case, we talk in those terms. I mean, we don't talk in the social terms that we would, let's say, with an agency or maybe with a mentee. And even with a mentee, we might not. They're very pragmatic. They want to find work and they want to integrate and adapt to the new Canadian business environment they're working in. So you have to be, sort of pointed and in each conversation and speak the language of those of that group that you're working with. So that's, yes, kind of just sort of building off of what Bruce said. It's an ongoing process. You got to keep doing that with your partners, and we have that on our docket every year where we're reaching out. Some of it's very pragmatic because we're reaching out for clients. So we work with agencies that way. But at the same time, underlying to all of that is we're educating those partners as to what we do and the impacts that we make. And so that they continue to feed, let's say, into our program and that they take back that information to their supervisors or to their organization. So there's a better understanding of what it is you're doing. So that's an ongoing piece. I don't know if that feeds into the actual applying for grants, but relationship building is so important.
Yeah,
Well,
I just want to name, because like you are both have been immersed and champions in your own communities in this for so long. But like when I come in and have had the opportunity to work with you both, you're playing a bridging role with every conversation that as I've worked with different, especially immigrant serving agencies, there's a lot of focus on the ethnocultural or the the sense of community served becomes to me a one-sided. And so this is one of the powers, I think, about mentorship as a program that functions not just for the people, but in your community, you become a bridge between people to have those conversations that might not naturally have. So I just wanted to name that. And it's the sooner I think you can claim that as your organizational role in your community, the better you'll be in your funding success.
You know, I use the, sorry, I was just going to say, I use the term that we never wanted to be transactional. And so what I mean by that is I really have nothing to sell. No funder gives me dollars per mentoring match. So, you know, Doug and I, our whole rationale is to ensure that whoever is involved in a mentoring partnership sees the benefits from their own perspective. And so to Doug's point, when we walk into an employer, this is not a social justice conversation. Social justice conversation with employer might get you one round of something. But after a while, I mean, businesses are trying to run businesses, and we're in the game of trying to make sure, we're in the world of trying to make sure that businesses understand there's an unbelievable talent pool out there, represented by newcomer professionals, and the rock stars, and they're really willing and able to join the workforce and to join that particular workplace. So the conversation isn't social justice. It really speaks to the heart of what the employer needs. And so Doug and I have to go in ears wide open. We've got to be able to pick up a nuance on a conversation. Most employers will indulge us over a cup of coffee or tea, and that's great. We have to be savvy enough, like you'll have to be savvy enough to really figure out, what does this employer need? If the employer doesn't need people at the moment, then it maybe changes the conversation to, hey, now you might have an opportunity to get your workforce ready, to get your team ready. Maybe the conversation should be about real diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as well as having workshops on unconscious bias, for example, there's no better way to allow some of your employees to test drive the things that they're learning than to be engaged in a mentoring program. And so then we might be able to position the mentoring program that way. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is change the hearts and minds of employers so that they know exactly that there's this awesome talent that they can go bring in. We're not a mentoring program to be a mentoring program. And in fact, about 5 years ago, I had a group of stakeholders ask me questions. And one of the questions was, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And I honestly said, if I'm still around in 10 years, which is 2025, I said, it means that I will have failed to convince Calgary employers to directly hire newcomer professionals. And I had a whole bunch of people telling me, well, how are you supposed to get funding, based on this model, Bruce? And I said, I'm not a mentoring program per se. Doug and I run, we think, two of the best mentoring programs around because of our awesome staff and boards and stakeholders. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get employers to understand where talent is. We also understand that mentoring will probably be around forever. So we do understand how those things come together. But to Doug's point, it's a business conversation that we tend to have. We could put on a slightly different hat when we go to talk to other groups. And I think what Doug and I have been able, through experience, be able to figure out is what hat to wear at what time. Doug's got a really nice collection of hats. And I've seen him pull out the right hat at the right time, and that's the magic of being in all those coffee conversations, all those tea conversations. That then leads to funding.
So I just want to check in whether anybody has questions. What I love about Doug and Bruce, like the passion means that they can fill the whole time and then some. So we'll just take a pause just to see if. Yeah, go ahead, Najib, and please, just raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Yeah, Bruce just mentioned that we are not doing the social justice when we're approaching the employer. It's not a kind of a social justice conversation. It's more about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Approaching employers, employer engagement has been it's been on ongoing work for us here in Lethbridge. Of course, we're new program, and the whole concept of mentorship and hiring newcomers is absolutely new. See, many employers lack the understanding of foreign credential and education, fear of unknown of hiring newcomers. They also lack the understanding of having diverse workforce because they don't know how to overcome that, or how to, because they're lacking resources within their own organization in the different skills that are bringing that might align or might not align with their work culture. So it's not an easy. I'm not going to put the word sale as Bruce said there. So it is not an easy process, and especially when employers are completely new to this concept of mentorship or hiring. So if you have any tools in the bag that just briefly, quickly, that we can just grab and hold on to, because yeah. I know there's not an easy way to overcome that, but few things that you can share from your expertise.
I mean, I can talk about one set, and I know Doug, as Doug mentioned, he and I are deeply connected to the IEC network, and there's some real hardcore tools there, aren't there, Doug? The employer's handbook and that sort of stuff. But I'll just speak very briefly, Najib, because that's a great question. I think that the number one tool is you walking into a room. I think the passion that you bring in, we've known each other for a long time. I know the passion you bring in to a room, the credibility will get you into a room, and you're a great speaker. I think ultimately the human dynamic is the first and most important thing. And I think each one of you on the line has that. Then there are some hardcore tools that, Doug and I can kind of start sharing. But I think it's just really being patient, really being persistent and consistent. You could even get scientific and say, I'm going to go after IT for the next month and figure out, how am I going to do that? Am I going to bring in an awesome IT expert from Peru with me when I make, my conversation with an employer? Do I find a champion somewhere within an employer and then start there? I think part of that is that strategy, but I think the passion that you bring into a room, remember, all these are really human based. Doug and I still connect with lots of our employer partners a decade later, and the connection is because of the human dynamic. The people at the employers have changed, but they've been able to pass on words like, you got to connect with ERIEC and CRIEC because, the passion Doug and Bruce bring into a room is amazing. They don't even need to know what the program is. They're going to let you in, they're going to listen to you, and then they're going to, move. Doug, do you want to sort of fill in with the great way that you approach things, including some of those great tools?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be a little bit differ from what Bruce has said, because he's made it clear that he's not a salesman for the program. We are salesmen, and I quite frankly, that's what it is. We get funding from the federal government. We get it from other sources. If we're not selling and they're not buying, we're not in business. And maybe that would suit the needs if you have an expiry date, like Bruce has said. And I agree, from a nonprofit, I've been in nonprofit for years. I always say, I agree with Bruce, if you're still around and we're still dealing with the same issues, then we obviously haven't done our job. But I'm also very realistic too, that mentorship isn't an overnight sort of panacea or magic pill that's going to, sort of fill the needs. It's still, and why I'm still involved with it is it's still nuanced. It's still very interesting to me. It's a simple concept, but there's a lot of ways to do that. And then, so we do sell this, and maybe it's not like hard sell, like, hey, buy mentorship now. It's more like we have to sell, we have to inform. So maybe it's not sales, but we have to inform in order to show that this kind of mitigative response or this kind of technique makes a difference for society, makes a difference for the business community. So once again, going back to the hats, depending on who we're speaking to. We currently, like as you said, Najib, what are some of the sort of key little tips that you can do? I affiliate myself. I'm the chair of the workforce committee for the Chamber of Commerce here in town. I was on the Edmonton Business Diversity Network. I connect myself into key places where like-minded organizations that have similar kinds of interests, mutual interests. That's where I position myself. And it's not just cold calling and going out and reaching out to business communities, but people who are already sort of warm clients. So there's those kinds of things. We're also, because of the loss of income, we had to shift from, like, say, from the provincial government loss of income. We started shifting into the private sector. What do they need? So once again, Bruce, I'm selling. I've got a flat sheet that says, hey, for $10,000, you can be a part of this and be a part of the solution. So I'm selling wherever I can. And there is a social justice element to it. There is a business element to it. At the end of the day, that $10,000 from Royal Bank or from TD Bank or whomever that wants to give the money, is they're investing in part of the solution for whatever systemic barriers we've identified. So yeah, like it's kind of a friendly kind of thing, right? I mean, I know Bruce has been preaching that he doesn't sell anything, and I always shake my head. Well, of course we are, you know, like. But I mean, but I do agree with Bruce's intent. You know, we have to be careful on how we word that. Where I'm not like selling Fuller brushes, or, and for all of you young people, you probably don't understand what that means, Electrolux vacuums or whatever. But I am selling, and constantly, and it's for the client, and it's for the business. That's part of that whole engagement between a mentor and mentee. So sorry, Bruce, but I think we needed to have some diametrically opposed opinions on this one.
That's why we're such good buddies.
It's good to have the controversy, and I think, you know, just to pluck in a really key, like, small component of that persuasive conversation is to always be asking questions to clarify for the employer, like, what are their issues around sourcing talent and retaining them. Because as Bruce said earlier, that's what this is about, right? From an employer perspective. And so the more you can help them clarify that, and then say, you know what, we've got this thing that's helpful, right? Like, that can help address part of that, then it's not hard sell. It's speaking into the thing that is important to them from the thing you offer, right? And so it feels like if the thought of sales or even a persuasive conversation feels like, you know, like it helps keep it in that relationship, in the you know, realm of a relationship conversation.
And just one last thing. I mean, as a program, as you have to be self-aware and intentional. So you have to be self-aware of where you're at in terms of, you know, like, if we just sat back and waited for people to come and see us and say, hey, how come nobody's coming to see us? You know, this is a great program. You have to get out there. You have to be intentional about it. You have to be strategic. You know, Bruce and I run, like, information sessions, lunch and learns. You know, just throwing bait out into the water, right? I mean, we want people to sort of say, hey, you know, this could be the solution that we're looking for, or this could be a part of it. So there's a lot of intentionality behind what we do, and we review that every year. So it just doesn't magically happen. And it can't be done, just even as Bruce has said, can't be just done over coffees. It has to be done by the whole team. Everybody's involved in terms of providing information at all levels. And so we're all salespeople. I mean, because if we weren't, we'd be out of business.
Yeah, and you know, just to clarify, it you know, as we sort of understand where the sales are, I think what Doug and I have been able to do is to build teams that don't look upon this as a 9-to-5 sales job. So each person in our team does incredible outreach work just by who they are. So the groups that they connect with, the people that they connect with, they're constantly talking about newcomers, they're constantly talking about the power of newcomers. And to Najib's point, part of that might be so-called social justice, but at the end of the day, mentoring just doesn't come out of nowhere. You know, between Doug and I, we're probably speaking 10 times a week, but so are the rest of our team, and they're out at any number of spots. and so there's a sales perspective from that perspective, but ultimately your goal isn't to sell mentoring. Your goal is to ensure that people understand why mentoring is such a great strategy, and it's a great strategy because it ultimately works. So sort of back to the first part of the conversation, there are stats out there. There's also work that we've done too that looks at why mentors mentor. So if you guys are looking for some hardcore data to build up your so-called business case, let us know and we can share some of that data as well. And that'll certainly help on the funding side. So as Doug says, you look at all the different stakeholders, who's involved in mentoring, who needs to be involved, and then you use the perspective that you need. And in one and the same conversation, Doug and I can go from social justice to diversity and equity and inclusion, to bottom line performance, to onboarding, to recruiting. And that's the kind of fluidity in the conversation that you need. Somewhere along the way, as Doug says, you're actually selling something. But ultimately, what people are hearing is your knowledge and your passion about what it is that you're trying to accomplish at the end of the day.
So I see we've got about 10 minutes left in the session. So just checking for other questions. And, feel free to just raise your hand or unmute.
I have a question for you both, and because I'm the writer, I'm going to say you guys are so good at the conversation and like the passion and putting it out there. But what if you actually are writing that application? And maybe Cheryl can speak to this too, because I know you write a lot of them. But how do you tap into that passion and that understanding and really pitch and sell that through a document? Because I think a lot of times it's really easy to like sit and answer the questions on a funding proposal, but like, how do you really like amp that up and make sure that you're really putting out that best picture? So on a written document, you can get a little bit of that, that passion and excitement that you bring to this conversation inside an application.
Yeah, I think if you know who you are, and that's a great question, by the way, Annette. But I think if you know who you are, you speak from the heart. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not bringing the hands and the mind into the conversation as well. So scoping it out, making sure that you're speaking truth, and you've got all your ducks in a row. Just to give you an example, and then I'll let Doug talk. Last application to the federal government, Doug and I were just like everybody else. We were looking for 5 years of funding. That's a lot of dough. So there was a lot of money riding on what we often think are the words that we use. So I scoped up the whole application, wrote it all out in draft format, and I realized it lacked this. So I had enough, and we were working on a letter count, and that which made it even tougher. You never ask somebody to write a short story when they can write a novel, because it's easier to write a novel. And so I had about 16 characters left. So at the very beginning of the application, I said, mentoring works, no ifs, ands, or buts. Full stop. I'm so confident that mentoring works. I felt passionate that I could say that. So if you're in Ottawa reading my application, you're thinking I'm the most arrogant person coming out of Alberta, or I seem to know what I'm talking about, right? But the passion came through. And when I talk to people, and it, that's sort of what counts. So it's sort of getting all your information. It's back to the first part of the conversation. You get all your ducks lined up. What is mentoring? How do you know it works? What are the hardcore studies? What does the community ask? Are there environmental scans out there? You've got all that stuff together. And then you hire somebody like you to write it up.
Yeah, and I think another, to kind of piggyback off of that, because I've written a few proposals in my day. It's really great to like there's sort of a saying, like, don't bury the lead. So right up front to say, here's the challenge and the issue we're taking on, because this is what's important to my community, my clients, my stakeholders, and here's why. And this is what we're going to do about it. because I think there, you know, something that often happens, and I'm guilty of this too, when we think programmatically, we get into the nuts and bolts of how the thing will work. And that needs to be clear, but they don't actually care about that. Generally, they want to know what you're going after and why it'll have impact. And so it's a great place to focus that passion of, we believe in this solution because there's, all the things we can point to, but this is the thing we want to improve. Yeah, as the top of the purpose. And I fully agree that the challenge in a Canadian context is each form's different. There's word counts, like rarely can you tell a really eloquent story because of all the constraints. So that's why it needs to be upfront. So it's for the person who's read the 100th proposal in the call, they get it right off the top,
I'm just gonna sorry to interrupt, but
go ahead, and then Najib.
Yeah, just know your audience. So whatever proposal that you've got going, there's going to be a language that they use. So make sure that whatever passion that you have, try and channel it into that language if you can. And I think going back to what we initially said and what one of my board members has said, I think it doesn't hurt to have testimonials. Things like, a quote, or let's say even from, a client that speaks to the movement of the needle that was changed, the behavior that was changed. If you can, the one-liner that Bruce put together for that, that first piece, that's brilliant. I mean, mentorship works, but I also think that, we constantly use our clients for testimonials at workshops, at events, because as you can see by my complexion, I'm not an immigrant or recent immigrant, you know what I mean? But people who have come to Canada have an experience, have an epiphany that they can share with the group. And that's it, if it's the provincial government or the federal government or the private sector, they want to hear how the needle was moved, and then they'll invest, I think. So going back to what my board member said, save those some of the feedback that you've been getting on, let's say, for example, the Alberta Mentorship Program. What kind of feedback are we getting? And if it says that this is really making a difference for some people, I would incorporate that into your application, or those kinds of things, because that, if it's government funding, they're moved by voters, and they've got certain things that they've got to accomplish. So you, as Bruce said, what's their rock in the road? Like for government, they need to have, if it's rural voters, if it's certain types of voters, they're looking for designs or mitigations that are going to be able to say to them in 2-3 years, hey, we want to get voted in again. We did this. So know your funder, know the kind of language that you have to incorporate.
Yeah, go ahead, Najib. Thanks, Bruce, or thanks, Doug.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything has been said, and I support most of that expertise, but we are new to this funding. Our program is new. It started in October, and we have the recent proposal that we wrote in 2020. I would say, I will go back to the point that Bruce made. Do you really need a program, or are you just wanting to have a program? If you're just having a program, then you don't have the story to tell. You don't have that punch. You don't have that everything that comes with that proposal. In our case, what we have done, we identified that need. You need to define the need. And it doesn't have to be that you have to dive into this new world of mentorship or employment piece for international educated professional. We knew the gap. We identified the need, and so we kind of got a small pocket of money, and we run something from a side of our table, providing information sessions so we can have we can we can bring in those international educated professionals to the office and learn from them and know their narrative, know their barriers they're facing, their challenges they're facing. And we've run a lot of focus group. That program ran for 2 years, but we had that contact with our international educated professional. The other data that we used was right readily available at our hand. We went back to our database and we said, okay, well, what are our clientele? What is the percent of our clients are international educated professionals from the federal skilled work program field, and how many are refugees, and how long do they stay with us? The refugees, of course, they stay for a longer period of time, and then for the international educated professional, they come for the first time, they come for a service, the second time, and that's it. We lose them after that. And so we knew that they're coming looking for service but we can't meet their need because we're so focused on refugees because we're funded by IRCC, where we settle guards. So we looked into our case management, we looked at our aftercare, see how many clients were just graduating every year. And sure enough, international educated professionals were on high rates. So they were just leaving. They were not coming back for our services. And so you need to collect data. You need to collect analysis. Funders are great for anecdotal information. They will accept that, but they're looking for hardcore data that's factual based. You can't just say, we feel, we think, in your proposal that we feel that there's this need, we think that this need, we partner with this, and so saying that there's a need and there's a gap. You have to have hardcore data. And the other thing is, how big do you want to have this program? Just the mentorship piece alone will meet that need? Or do you need to have an employment program that you think that you need an employment program, and that will come based on your research, your data, your analysis that you're putting together. Do you want to have just the mentorship piece? Do you want to have employment counseling there? Do you want to have resume screening? Do you want employment engagement? Because that's a completely other world that you can educate your clientele, your participants, but you need to now work with the other side as well. And that requires resources, that requires talent, that requires people. And so do you want to focus on entrepreneurial spirit of newcomers as well, or work placement, mentorship? So it's in preparation of licensure. That's not a small piece either. What about information sessions that are provided for employers and participant at the same time? So you need to have a good understanding of what gaps are there. What are you solving? And if you know that, then I would say you're a dragon. You have that punchline. You just flames are coming out of your mouth, and so the funders love that because you've done your homework. And so that worked for us. I just wanted to throw that in there, and which is firsthand experience in the past 6 months, 8 months.
That's great, Najib. I know we're sort of at our time. Olatoyan's put in a really great question in the chat, so maybe we can end with this. In a situation where there's a pool of funders, how do we determine who best to approach?
I mean, what we've done, and Troy, that's a great question. We can follow up in much greater detail later. But it really depends. As Doug said, each funder has their own agenda. And so the funding is connected to a whole bunch of different things. It's connected to the reason why they have a pool of money available to you. It's connected to why you would want to approach that funder for that amount of money. So really digging in and finding out as much about the funder and as much about that particular piece of funding as you possibly can. And if you can meet the needs of the funder within what you do, that's great. But if it's stretching, as Doug would say, if it's stretching your resources too thinly, if you think that it's too much outside of your bailiwick, then it's going to put a stress and strain on your organization that you don't need to have. So it really is finding that sweet spot where what you're looking for your clients and what the funder is looking for you really seem to meet and they intersect in a really good place.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I just quickly understand, I think what Najib had said. I think, you know, needs assessment, you need to know what your needs are. Like, so in Lethbridge, it might be different than what we can design or what gaps might be here in Edmonton. So Najib may design a mentorship program that is completely sort of tailored to some of the needs he has. So I think that's the approach. And then I would look at also mission alignment. So, you know, so some of those funders, you know, it's interesting. Even though you know, when we got hit with our cut, it was just like, oh my God, it was the end of the world. But it didn't take long once you start looking around to other funders, and it didn't happen immediately. But we were able to find like-minded or new programs, and even we found that the private sector started to come to the fore more than they ever have in all of the years that we've been working with them. And so that landscape changes. So the challenge becomes, well, do you want to hitch your wagon to all of these funders? Because you might run into trouble with that as well. So funding may not be the issue, but finding the right funder for your mission is probably, I would do a lot of soul searching because, you know, and I'll give you an example. We were looking at maybe doing some work specifically with women. And because apparently there's lots of funding out there for working with women, especially doing, you know, some of these barriers that they're facing and the transitions that they're trying to overcome. We had to look at ourselves. And in fact, I had a couple board members saying, hey, I don't know if this is actually something that we should be doing. Like, we work with women and men equally, but do we really want to get into something that is a little bit out of scope for us? And I'm sure we could maybe adapt to it and would take some time, but I don't know. It's not really part of our mission. And so we had to do some soul searching and kind of either negate that opportunity and just say, you know what, let's stick to what we're good at. Because if we start overreaching and then fail, because one of the things that's been mentioned is what Bruce and I walk into some of these rooms with is we have a program that's been successful and has, you know, credibility. And if we go around thinking we are something else and we don't actually fulfill that, it may not look good on us and may impact the kind of work that we're doing already.
No, great. Thanks for that. And I would just throw in, it's really helpful to do, like I call it the two-pager, the two-page proposal concept to really articulate out what you think you're wanting to do and the impacts. And I'll check in, Annette, about whether we have something like that. We can make a sample to include the send out. Because it makes it easier. It's easy to get sucked in. You look at a funding call that's live and to like, how can I squish my hand in the glove, except I have 8 fingers and the glove only has 4, you know, to really see, does that fit? It's also useful to do it outside of a funding call, like to say, this is the next thing that will really serve the needs of our community. Could I just share it with you and get your feedback? If there's that kind of availability with the funding officer, then they know what you're interested in, right? And so it can, not always, but it can sometimes, they can kind of help you out to say, actually, there's a really good fit coming here, you should really apply, you know? And so it again, like, to not have a relationship with funders where that's possible, it shuts down an avenue about who do you count as stakeholders in your work. So we are a little bit past time. Thank you so much for all of your questions and your comments. And as always, we sort of are feeling like these boot camp calls are like the little bit of the culture of mentorship that we're trying to build across the province. So we really appreciate you coming out. I've just popped in. We know funding has a lot in it. So we've planned an upcoming session, not until the fall, but in September, to kind of pick up the conversation, because we know this is an issue year in and year out. And so there's always more to talk about and more to learn. But thanks so much to everyone. We'll be doing a follow-up to everyone who registered with some details about this and additional resources. But I know, I've heard Doug and Bruce make this offer over and over. If you need something, just reach out. We're really trying to establish a culture of sharing, because we're all trying to offer something good to our clients, and I think we'll go farther together if we can collaborate and share the way that we can. So thanks very much. I really appreciate you coming out today, and hope you have a good day.